Hi, everybody. How are you? I think there's a clicker right here. Perfect. First of all, who knew that Bina was such a dancer? Did you have the video? I mean, she looked like she's got another career ahead of her, Well, speaking about another career ahead of you, I didn't know I had another career ahead of me after I sold Joie De Vivre in 2010. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Actually, let's go to this. Yes. I'm going to present the peak model that Binu talked about here, partly because it's relevant to any company. We'll talk about employees, we'll talk about customers, we'll talk about investors as well. But we're going to go through it relatively quickly so that we have some time for you to just ask questions. You're welcome to ask questions about Airbnb. I'll talk a little bit about that, but I have been at Airbnb for 5.5 years. So I was there in the very early days when the company was about, in terms of math, it's 98% of the business we've ever had has been in the last 5.5 years. So it's a much larger company today. I'm just a strategic advisor to the founders now. I still own hotels as well. I sold the management company and the brand, but I still, at that time in 2010 when I sold the company, I still owned 20 hotels, of which I now still own 9, including one of them just right down the street, a hotel called the Avatar, which you would have seen if you were driving along Great American Parkway? Yeah. So the most important thing is I want to have some time for Q&A, so you're welcome to ask lots of questions. So let's get started. What's the most neglected fact in business? Any thoughts? I think it is the fact that we're all human. And it gets lost on balance sheets. It gets lost in all kinds of ways because humans are a factor in business, in almost every business. Maybe in the future with robotics and AI, it'll be less the case. But it is still the case today. So the question I asked myself at a very pivotal time in our company's history, which was the dot-com bust, is what is it that actually defines the operating system for how we do business? So I snuck a little technology lingo in there with the OS. But I have to say that my experience in running my company, over time, I realized that psychology was probably the greatest skill I could have learned in college, and I only took one psychology class in college. So I have some regrets about that. This is going to be a tale of two companies. The model I'm going to show you today has been used, as Bina said, by all kinds of companies, from Zappos to Whole Foods Markets. But both the companies that I'm going to show you today, Joie De Vivre and Airbnb, made it fundamental to how the company operated. And I think it had a pretty catalytic effect for both companies. Joie De Vivre, 52 boutique hotels, which made us the second largest boutique hotelier in the U.S. The 52, we never had more than 38 at any one time, but we had 52. And it was I was there for 24 years as the CEO, founded it when I was 26 years old, when I was a young child. Airbnb, it says 4 million there. This is a terrible slide because, frankly, every month it has to be updated. It's now 4.6 million. That was 4 months ago. So that's how fast the company continues to grow, 4.6 million homes around the world. So the model that we had as an operating company for Joie De Vivre that we put into place in about 1997 when we were 10 years old was this. Now, people laugh at me and they say, when I go to Stanford or Harvard Business School and I give a talk, they say, show us your like operating model for the business. And I show them a heart and they say, that's silly. A heart is the operating model of your business. I said, no, it is. And we learned this from Southwest Airlines. Now, back in 1997, my company was 10 years old. We had 13 hotels all around the Bay Area. And frankly, it was unclear to me how we could scale and continue to grow at the pace we were without coming up with a whole new model of how we did business. So we had two senior Southwest Airlines executives come in because I thought the culture of Southwest was so interesting. Here's this company that was very low priced, but they probably had the best culture of any airline. So we came up with this as our model that's based upon the premise, and it's also known as the service profit chain. It was a book that came out of Harvard Business School in the 1980s, or 70s maybe. The service profit chain, and I call it karmic capitalism because what goes around comes around in business. The question is, how long does it take? So at the base of this heart is the idea of creating a unique corporate culture. If you do that well, you tend to have enthusiastic staff. If the staff's enthusiastic, you tend to end up having strong customer loyalty because they can feel the staff's enthusiasm and their passion and their appreciation for how they're being treated by the company. And then if the company has strong customer loyalty, you grow market share, you have a profitable and sustainable business, and then you can invest back in the culture. So it's sort of a virtuous circle with the first point on the circle where all this heart blood is being fed from is that culture. So in 1997, we created we had a great culture before, I think. When you call your company Joie De Vivre, which is a very impractical name for a company, it means joy of life. It's hard to spell, hard to pronounce. The culture was really woven into how we operated. But we put it in this form because we basically turned this into a little card that was given to every single employee. And so the housekeeping staff, the night auditors, everybody knew the Joie De Vivre heart. And they could tell us that if the heart wasn't beating correctly, we could ask them where in the heart is not working. And sometimes it was between point number 1 and point number 2. It was that artery in the heart where we as a company thought we were providing a great culture, but for some reason the restaurant employees or the spa employees or the hotel employees at one of our businesses weren't feeling it. So that was the model until we got to 2001. Now, in 2001, this is meant to be the dark slide because 2001, for those of us in the Bay Area, was we went into a very dark slide, especially down here in Silicon Valley. So what happened in 2001? Well, we started to go into the dot-com bust. And that dot-com bust was pretty painful. But then we also had 9/11 later in the year, and so nobody wanted to jump on a plane anytime soon after 9/11 for good reason. Then we made traveling to the United States from outside the United States much more difficult for safety and security reasons. And that meant international travelers found it harder to get here, which for a place like San Francisco and Silicon Valley, which is where all of our hotels were, meant that it made it harder for people to come visit us, and therefore travel got reduced. SARS happened during that time. Do you remember SARS? Asian travel dropped by 90% over a 10-month period because of the SARS virus. Then what else did we have? We had a recession. We had a war in Afghanistan. Then we had the Iraqi war, which, of course, during the Iraqi war, we went to war with the French. If you remember this, it was sort of a diplomatic war, and the U.S. said, certain parts of the U.S. said, we're no longer going to eat French fries. They're now called freedom fries. Do you remember that? That was when many people decided to start boycotting French companies, and I realized, oh, damn, I called my company the wrong name. And I would get these emails from Alabama and Los Gatos occasionally, and they would say, you Frenchies, we hate you, we're boycotting Joie De Vivre. And I would write them back and I'd say, we're not French, we're actually an American company, we're based in San Francisco. And they'd write back, because at this point we did have email, and they'd write back in an email, San Francisco, ? Oh, that's worse. San Francisco sort of left of Paris. So 2001, 2002, I was not feeling a lot of Joie De Vivre. What I was feeling was I was scared. I didn't know. We didn't have enough money. We had about 1,200 employees at that point, and I did not know how we were going to be able to make payroll about 3 or 4 months from now, which led me to going to a local bookstore looking for a business book. And after about 5 or 10 minutes in the bookstore, I realized my problems were more serious than business. So I ended up in the psychology and self-help section of the bookstore. The classic CEO, wearing sunglasses, like I'm looking through self-help books, like how am I going to get through this? And I saw a book by Abraham Maslow. Now, I remember having taken one psychology class in college. I remembered that Maslow was the good guy. He was the guy who sort of said, why do we study worst practices in human behavior? Why don't we study best practices in human behavior? And he said things like this. He basically said we should look at how people can actualize their potential. And he created the famous Maslow's hierarchy of needs. which said there are some basic needs in life. Once those needs are partially met, you move up the pyramid. And so this theory, which comes from the mid-20th century, is a theory of psychology that's quite well known. But weirdly, nobody had ever applied this pyramid to organizations or to business. Late in Maslow's life, he unfortunately died at age 62 in 1970. Late in his life, he actually was starting to look at exactly what I decided to do, which was, what if you applied this pyramid to organizations? And the reason I did it was because, damn, we were going out of business anyways, so why not go down and out of business and learn something at the same time? So that was my philosophy of why I started reading Maslow. I came to the office one day after having read 2 Maslow books, and we had our leadership team, top 15 people in the company. I said, we're going to actually start using Maslow's theory and apply it to our organization. And they looked at me like, Chip, you've been hanging out in the hot tub too long. But the premise was this: if this is our operating system as humans, and humans are full of organizations are full of humans, why not apply it to our employees, our customers, and our investors? And that's what we did. We turned the hierarchy of needs pyramid into something that was really just 3 levels, a little bit simpler. We call it the transformation pyramid. Survival, succeed, transform. Those are the 3 paradigms of how you operate in life. Whether it's the date you're going to have on Saturday night, it's a survival date, or a succeed, or a transformation date, or a family vacation, or how an employee sees their work, how a customer sees their relationship with who they do business with. So that's what we did. We turned it into 3 different pyramids. This is the employee pyramid. Money, recognition, meaning. What's missing there on the right-hand side at the money level is creating satisfaction. So think about this for a moment, and I'm going to talk about this in the context of hospitality, but you could, whatever business you're in, you could apply it to your own company. The base need most people have when it comes to what it means to be an employee is their compensation package. And it's not just money. It is the full range of, what are the benefits, et cetera. That is important because, frankly, especially in the Bay Area, it's really expensive to live here. So if you actually don't address this base need well, people can't move up the pyramid. You may love working for the company, but if you can't pay your rent or the mortgage or for groceries or whatever, you can't stay in that job. But the number one reason people leave their job in the U.S. is not because of money. It's 4th place. What's the number one reason people leave their jobs? Because they hate their boss. So how's your boss? Is she sitting next to you? Okay. Because you said that so quickly. No. Yeah.
I just know it statistically, and I've experienced it.
Yeah. It is exactly true. So the number one reason people join a company and they leave their boss. People join a company and they leave their boss. So the reason moving up this pyramid is important, or any of these pyramids, is because if you stay at the base of the pyramid, yes, your survival needs are being met. But who wants to just survive? Don't we want to have something more than survival in our life? So the middle of the pyramid here is recognition. So if you feel recognized by your boss, by the company, by your fellow employees, you feel like the place has created a career path for you. See the left-hand side of the pyramid? There are 3 kinds of relationships we have with our work. It's either a job, a career, or a calling. When you actually move from thinking of your work from a job to a career, you move into a place of feeling you're looking at your path, your career path. People don't talk about a job path. They talk about a career path, because the path is the process of feeling seen by those in your work and feeling like there's a path of growth for you. All of that's good, and that creates loyalty. Most companies do that okay, not bad. They look at ways to actually measure how the employee feels about whether they're being recognized. What's at the peak of the pyramid here, though, is where the magic happens. In all 3 pyramids I'm going to show you today, that's where the differentiation happens. It's where the loyalty happens even more significantly. When you create an environment and a workplace where people have a sense of meaning in what they do, whether it's the kind of work they're doing or the kind of company they're doing it for, and ideally it's both. It's a combination of what they do on a daily basis with how they feel about the company's mission and purpose. You do that well, and you are creating an organization like Southwest Airlines. Southwest Airlines flight attendants have a much better time in their life than United flight attendants, at least from my perspective. They seem like they're having a better day, usually. Right? True? So there's an element of, if you actually create this model, you create an environment where people are more inspired by their work. They might even feel that their work is a bit of a calling at what they're doing. Why is that important? Well, because it means you have happier employees. Happier employees tend to lead to happier customers, especially in the service industry. But it's also important because it frankly creates an environment when people actually feel a sense of meaning and recognition in what they do. They get a little bit less distracted, or they're not as distracted by the base of the pyramid. One of the things I was proud of is Joie De Vivre didn't pay more than our competitors. We paid pretty much the 50th percentile, not much better than that, relative to our competitors. And yet we had 1/3 or 1/4 the turnover of our competitors because people loved the culture, but we didn't have to actually overpay for people. Sometimes in some companies have to overpay you because you've heard the culture sucks, but you're going to go into combat and say, I'll do it just for the money. Right. Okay. So that's an example of the recognition and the meaning's not there. Sometimes the money then becomes predominant, and that's expensive for a company. So let me use an example here. Because this is actually, for those of you who are thinking about this and how do you apply it in your company, let me use 3 examples. So this is someone on the front desk of a hotel. There's someone cleaning rooms, a housekeeper or a maid, and then there's a bartender. What's at the peak of the pyramid, one of the things that I learned along the way with this model is what's at the peak of the pyramid for your employees may vary based upon the job classification of the employee. It may vary based upon just 2 individuals. But as you start looking at a larger organization and saying, my gosh, the housekeeping staff has a very different sense of what creates meaning for them than the bartenders. So you start to actually, when you start getting deeper into this, you realize, okay, well, for our front desk staff, what we learned in that downturn, and by the way, we tripled in size between 2001 and 2006. The quick stats. Between 2001 and 2005, Silicon Valley experienced a 52% drop in RevPAR. Not for an individual hotel that was losing market share. That was the average in the market. 52% drop in RevPAR between 2001 and 2005. San Francisco experienced in that same period a 35% drop in RevPAR. That is awful. That's like a natural disaster hit. It didn't. We just had an economic disaster. And so during that time, we actually tripled in size. The truth is it was between 2001 and 2006, I think it was, that we got to tripling in size. But how did we do that? It was because of this. So that woman on the end, the front desk, we call our front desk clerks hosts, we always have. What she feels, what gives her a sense of meaning is to know that she's built a relationship with the recurring customers. So one of the things we did during the downturn is we just said, okay, why don't we have our customers, who are our regular customers, come to a staff meeting and tell them why, as a customer, they love staying in that particular hotel. And we would tell the customer, who's a regular customer, we're not paying them to do this, but we just say, thank you for doing this. Come on stage. There'll be 30 or 50 employees in the audience. Just talk for 5 minutes about why you love coming to this hotel and give a couple examples of what employees have done in this hotel that made a difference to you. So creating that kind of culture where we had customer stories being told to many of our hotels. Not all of our hotels did this, but most of them did. Having those stories told gave a sense of meaning and purpose, especially to our front desk hosts, because they're usually the people who are creating the most sticky relationships with our guests. The housekeeping staff, you know what it was for them? It was actually doing a weekly or every couple weeks potluck, where they bring their food in from their favorite culture. Because like 95% of our housekeeping staff didn't grow up in the U.S. They're immigrants. And so the idea that they could actually bring potluck, their lumpia because they are Filipino, or it could be, they're some kind of, spring roll because they're Vietnamese. They would bring that in, and we actually helped encourage the idea of having regular potlucks with the housekeeping staff. And the housekeeping staff that enjoyed it the most were those that actually brought their food in. And then, frankly, for the bartenders, they're mercenaries. I mean, the truth is that stuff didn't matter to them. What mattered to them is during that downturn, we had a lot of extra hotel rooms available. So we said, well, if you're an employee in the company, once a quarter, you get to go stay at another Joie De Vivre hotel for free for 2 nights every quarter. Because, why not take those free hotel rooms? Those hotel rooms are going to be empty and, offer them as a perk to our employees. So long story short is, what creates meaning or a sense of recognition to some degree varies on the nature of the employee. So let's look at the customer pyramid. So the customer pyramid, same model, survival, succeed, and transform. But no matter what kind of company you are, the baseline need for a customer is to have their expectations met. I don't care if you're a dry cleaner or a defense contractor. In either case, that's the baseline of what our customer is looking for. And if you do that well, you create satisfaction, which means in the old days, pre-Milestone, pre-internet, back in the old days, satisfaction tended to create loyalty. But in the era of the internet, customers are more promiscuous. And I'm not talking about their relational issues. I'm talking about the fact that the internet created options and choices. And because there are more options and choices, people are less loyal. So actually just meeting expectations does not necessarily create satisfaction today. Does not just necessarily create loyalty today. Desires is a step up from that. When you as a customer feel like your desires were met, and it could be designing a website for you. Milestone did something for you, designed a website, designed a whole campaign for you in terms of digital marketing strategy. And not only were your expectations met, your desires were met, you're more likely to be committed. A lot of times, the way you actually address a customer's desires isn't just baseline stuff. It's the kind of stuff that your competitors don't do. And sometimes it's very socially or relationally driven. So if you remember, levels 3 and 4 of Maslow's pyramid were social belonging and esteem needs. And quite often, it is in that desires piece where you actually address some of those social belonging and esteem needs of your client. So that's the middle level of the pyramid. The top of the pyramid is where, again, the magic happens. When you address the unrecognized needs of your customers, you have done something that the customer didn't ask for. Steve Jobs is quite famous for the fact he did not like focus groups. Why? Because in his way of talking, focus groups only address the bottom 2 levels of this pyramid. In a focus group, you won't often hear a customer talk about their unrecognized needs. It may help you understand how to mind read your customers of what a customer would love to have, but they often don't talk about it. But if you do that well, if you actually address the unrecognized needs of your customers well, you've created an absolute, I don't want to say competitive proof, because frankly, as soon as you did it, your competitors are going to look at it and they're going to try to copy it. So it's like I remember when in 2001, I was going on a JetBlue flight, and they were the first airline in the U.S. to have a TV on the back of the seat in front of you. So you got your own personalized device as opposed to looking at, it is weird today, right? When you go on some airlines and they still have like that up there, on, like really bad quality, and you get no choice of what you're going to watch. Well, in 2001, 2002, 2003, JetBlue was the first. And why was that sort of important back then? First of all, we had just at that point realized we now have to go through these security lines at the airport that we didn't used to have that were, frankly, they're still bad, but they were so bad back then. Do you remember the process? I mean, it was even worse. That process, by the time you got on the plane and you'd been frisked, and you're like going, the fact you actually got a little bit of freedom and to enjoy your own TV there was a nice delight. And JetBlue was able to make that a competitive edge for them until basically what happens up there is it starts to go from an unrecognized need to a desire, to an expectation, and your competitors come in, and gravity takes hold. And like for me, when it comes to I hate United, and of course I live in San Francisco, and it's United's a hub. Is there a United person in the room right now? Oh, no.
I'm not a United person. I'm a frequent flyer.
Oh, you're a frequent flyer. Well, so what about Wi-Fi on United? Now, when airlines first started offering Wi-Fi, especially for those of us who are business travelers, yes, an unrecognized need may be met. But today, 60% of the time when I'm on a United flight and it's supposed to have Wi-Fi, it doesn't work. So it's like
It's like 80%.
today, Wi-Fi in the air is like plumbing. You expect it to work. 5 years ago, no, it was an unrecognized need. So just know that this model here helps you to understand what's your differentiator. But just because your differentiator is a differentiator today doesn't mean it will be a differentiator 2 or 3 years from now. So I joined Airbnb 5.5 years ago. Tiny company. 3 founders were 25, 27 years old. They were actually 29 and 30. And they had never run a business before. And the business was growing fast, but it was a tiny little business going after, budget millennial people, and that was all it was. So one of the first things I looked at when I joined them was I said, what is the mantra of your unrecognized need in the company? Now, the reason, let me say, they came to me and asked me to join partly because I'd sold my company and I lived in San Francisco, but they also had read Peak. They'd read my book. And I said, so what is your mantra? What's your 2-word mantra that defines your, what is at the top of your pyramid? And they said, home sharing. Home sharing is your mantra? Like, that's your business. You're in the business of home sharing. What's the thing that actually you're doing? And they couldn't come up with it. And so we did this exercise. And I would suggest you take this exercise home with you and do it yourself. We had, at that point, we had 10 senior level people in the company. We did an offsite retreat. So Brian Chesky, who I mentored, who's the CEO, he also mentored me because I learned a lot. We did the book that you're going to get, which it says Modern Elder. It's called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. It's my 5th book. It comes out 2 months from now. So I was a modern elder in the sense that I was an elder in the company. I was 52 years old when I joined. I'm 57 now. 52 years old, surrounded by people where the average age was 26. Do the math. And so I was both a mentor and an intern because I actually gave them emotional intelligence and leadership and strategy and all that and hospitality industry stuff. They gave me digital intelligence and cultural trends. So I call it the EQ for DQ trade agreement. I gave them EQ, emotional intelligence. They gave me DQ, digital intelligence. But at this retreat that I was leading, I sat here, Brian sat there, and I asked them the question, what business are we in? What business are we in? And he said, we're in the home sharing business, which is what he said was the top of the pyramid. I said, thank you, Brian. What business are we in? And I asked him again. And so the way this exercise works is you ask the question 5 times, and you cannot answer the same way twice. So what it leads to is the process of getting to distilling down, what is it? What business are we in? This came from Peter Drucker, the most famous management theorist of all time. And we applied it at Joie De Vivre. It came to help us realize we were in the identity refreshment business. We helped people come to our hotels, and by staying in one of our hotels and the personality of the hotel, it would rub off on them. So that's a longer story. But here is what we learned from Airbnb. We learned we were in the belong anywhere business. We help people have a sense of belonging, and we are in 65,000 cities around the world. Marriott is in less than 1,000. Marriott's the biggest hotel company in the world today. They're in less than 1,000 cities. We're in 65. Why? Because we're in homes. Homes are everywhere. North of the Arctic Circle, there are homes on Airbnb. So that led us to this. That 30-second ad ran at the Super Bowl last year, Super Bowl 2017, not 2018. So this was right after the election. I'm not going to get into politics. This was right after the inauguration. And we said, you know what? There's a worry that we have that the world is all going to be about walls and borders. And over 50% of Airbnb's business is people traveling across borders. It's international travelers. And therefore, it's really important for us to put a stake in the ground and to help people feel like they can belong anywhere. So the process of actually coming up with your 2-word mantra or whatever in Joie De Vivre, it was identity refreshment. In the case of Airbnb, it was belong anywhere. Figuring out what that is, that unrecognized need that you're meeting or you're trying to deliver to your customers at the top of the pyramid, that is something you can organize the company around. Not just your advertising, not just your website, but literally the whole operation. For us, in the process of creating hotels, we actually got into the thought of like, what is the kind of personality this hotel should have, and what kind of adjectives would the guests describe this hotel as that would be aspirational for themselves. So you really get to a place where you understand your customer to a level that your competitors don't. And that, to me, is why it's a big competitive strategic advantage when you get to this level of understanding humans. So speaking of humans, this is the third part of the pyramid. I'm not going to talk a lot about them because mostly investors are not human. No, I'm kidding. Now, there are investors who are human. There are some who are not. But the model actually works for investors, too, in the sense that the basic kind of investor is just they want the best return possible. That's the base of the pyramid. It's all about the transaction. Relationship investors are like Warren Buffett. He says when he hires somebody for one of the companies that they own, he says to him or her as the CEO, I want you to act as if you're going to be here 100 years from now. So operate with that mindset. And so it's a long-term relationship kind of thing. And then an investor who is investing for the purpose of pride of ownership or something bigger than just the return of investment is a legacy investor. So if you take all three of these pyramids and you put them together, this is what it looks like. The employee pyramid on the bottom left-hand corner, this customer pyramid on the top, and in the bottom right-hand corner is the investor pyramid. In the middle, weirdly, is that thing we came up with in 1997. So the three pyramids is something we came up with in, so I wrote about, so I came up with the three pyramids in 2002, 2003. The heart, I came up with the company, we came up with it together with the Southwest people helping us in 1997. Weirdly, the heart fits in the middle. And the reason this is weird is because if you look at this, number one on the heart is the culture. Remember, number two on the heart was the enthusiastic staff, which is right next to the employee pyramid. Strong customer loyalty, right next to the customer pyramid. Profitable and sustainable business, right next to the investor pyramid. So that heart, which we created completely unrelated to the pyramid, we created the pyramid thing and we had something in the middle, and it said the inspired company. We did not have the heart in the middle. And I gave a speech at one of our hotels, and there's a woman in the back of the room. She kept just shouting, and I thought she was just like she didn't like me or something. And so I said, so what is it that you're trying to tell me? And she said, you stupid. Earlier you showed the heart, and the heart is like that was your culture. And then at the end, now you're showing this. But in the middle, you have an inverted pyramid, which is like the shape of a heart. Why don't you put the heart in the middle? Like, oh, wow, that's a good idea. So that's what we did after that. Figured that one out. And, of course, it all lined up really well with those three things. So what happens? If a heart's doing the right thing, it beats. It's that heart that actually helps these three pyramids to have a relationship with each other. So for those of you who think like, oh, this is just Chip, weird hippie dippy Chip from San Francisco with the company named Joie De Vivre. Okay, this isn't relevant to most of the rest of us. Well, there are a bunch of companies that literally have used the peak model and Maslow's hierarchy of needs to inform their employee or their customer strategy, or in some cases, both, as well as the investor strategy. These are a bunch of companies that have utilized Maslow or peak. And again, for those of you who say, okay, well, that's just 9 companies. That doesn't, I'm still not convinced. That's fine. You can be a skeptic. Go read the January-February issue of 2012, in which the Harvard Business Review, which by nature is pretty much empirical, very intellectual-based kinds of thinking around management, leadership, and business, they had a whole issue with a happy face on it, where they basically showed how the peak model works, in the sense that if you create happiness in your employees, and culture, it leads to long-term profits, and it's a competitive advantage. That's the book, Peak, How Great Companies Get Their Mojo, from Maslow. It's now in paperback. And in the paperback form, it allowed me to add some things to it. So the paperback form came out last year, which includes 8 leadership practices. It's a little bit hard to see, so I'll read these to you. But these are leadership practices that I think really embody those people who can operate in a peak approach to business. Because frankly, all of this is theory until you actually make it into practice. So first of all, they embody an inherently positive view of human nature. They create the conditions for people to live their calling. I'm going to tell you a quick story on this one. Southwest Airlines, not quite the company it used to be honest with you, but still a pretty good company. I remember back in 2008, 2009, we had the recession happening. And fuel prices, if I recall, were actually pretty high at that time as well. And so all of the airlines, including United, started doing a fuel charge surcharge. Do you remember this? They did fuel charge surcharges, and then they started charging for bags. Prior to the Great Recession, airlines did not charge for extra bags. So this sounds familiar? Southwest Airlines chose not to charge for the bags. Why do you think Gary Kelly, the CEO of Southwest, chose not to charge for the bags? Differentiator to their customers. Okay? What else?
Compassion.
Compassion to who? To the customer. Okay, keep going. Those are true, but those are not the answer he gave me. Because here's the story. I was in the back of a plane once watching people get on the plane, and there was this guy handing out peanuts while the plane we were in the air. And I was like, this guy doesn't look like a flight attendant. And it turns out it was Gary Kelly, the CEO of Southwest Airlines. He is in the back of the plane, and I just went over and talked with him. And I asked him a question. Why are you not charging for the bags? Because at that time, an article had come out in the Wall Street Journal saying that Southwest Airlines is losing $500 million a year in revenue they could have had if they charged for the bags. And at Wall Street, analysts were beating up on Southwest. So what did he say? What's that? Loyalty to who? Loyalty to who? Consumer. Okay.
The employees unhappy.
All right, here we go. Yes. So this again, back to number 2 here. Create the conditions for people to live their calling. He said the following. He said, why do you think we're doing it? And I said, it's a great, marketing ploy, right? It's like, he said, if it's a marketing ploy, then it's like not baked into the company, baked into our culture. Our culture is all about helping people to live their calling. These are his exact words. He had never read at that point the Peak model. And he said, what about flight attendants? How do we help them live their calling in a difficult time, in a recession? He said, have you ever noticed that United flight attendants, he used United too, United flight attendants don't seem as happy as Southwest flight attendants? And I said, yes. And he said, well, that was true even before United started charging for bags. You know what happened when United started charging for bags and all the other companies started charging for bags? Do you know what consumers did? They brought all their bags on the plane. Do you know what happened? Is the flight attendants who were supposed to be providing service became baggage handlers. And when they became baggage handlers, they actually liked their job less. And guess what? The unions that were representing the baggage handler flight attendants wanted a bunch more perks because their job got worse. But most importantly, what he said to me is, do you know what has happened to on-time performance for our competitors in the last 6 months since they did that? It all went downhill. And we're now actually 20% better than the second place when it comes to on-time performance. And Chip, and at that point he knew my name, and Chip, do you know that the number one reason why people are loyal to an airline is actually on-time performance? So they charged for the bags, and it really screwed up the on-time performance for those other airlines. So long story short is, it ended up being a very good business case for them, and it was part of their ad campaign. But it came and started with the fact that they worried that if the flight attendants had to deal with all of those bags coming on the plane, it was going to take away from employee satisfaction of the flight attendants. Make sense? Third, promote and measure the value of intangibles, because frankly, what's at the top of the pyramid is more intangible than what's at the base. Your physiological needs, as we get closer to lunchtime, you will notice you're hungry. But when you go to bed tonight and you put your head on the pillow and you say, was I self-actualized today? That is harder to measure. It's an intangible. Number 4, move fluidly between being a transactional leader, which is at the base of the pyramid, and a transformational leader. 5 is nurture, value, and evolve corporate culture as your ultimate differentiator. 6, calibrate the balance between being conscious and being capitalist. It's a longer story I can do in Q&A if you want. And 7, disrupt the customer pyramid with consistent new innovations at the peak, because what's at the peak over time will go back down to the base. And then lead to peak, which means you're always a role model and a Sherpa, which is the people who help you get to Mount Everest. You meet people on the mountain and you take them up to the peak. So in sum, I tend to see everything in pyramids these days. Even a mountain like this looks like a peak. Because to be honest, this model that we're talking about here is not just a model you can use to lead or to consider your customer needs or even dealing with your investors. But it is a way to look at life. And just to say, what's my hierarchy of needs? You could have come to this conference and said, as someone attending the conference, what would be your survival need? What would be your succeed need? What would be your transformational need? Probably it would be in the form of the customer pyramid, of your expectations, your desires, your unrecognized needs. When you start to see the world that way, you actually start to see what are your priorities. And sometimes in the short term, the priorities are at the base of the pyramid. And then you realize, for many of us, especially with our jobs, and I will call it a job, that when you're doing the same thing over and over again, you get bored with it. And so that's another opportunity to look at it in the form of a pyramid and saying, okay, I'm spending all of my time in my job on the kinds of things that are the base of the pyramid kind of things. What would be the kind of things that would actually be transformative to me in my work? Or to me in my relationship with a spouse? Or in however you want to look at it. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. I am now I'll finish up and then open it up for Q&A. I am now, thankfully, not working 70 hours a week at Airbnb anymore. And I am just an advisor to the founders, which has been great. That's given me the time to write this next book, Wisdom at Work, Making a Modern Elder. And the thing that was the secret that you didn't say, but that you said you were going to say, was that I've created this thing called the Modern Elder Academy, which is the first of its kind in the world. It's a midlife wisdom school. It's where people, predominantly 45 to 65, but we have people coming anywhere from 30. We actually have someone coming who's 30 years old who wants to get wise faster. But it's basically a place where people actually go. It's on a beachfront campus in Mexico, an hour north of Cabo San Lucas. And it's a place where people go to repurpose themselves and imagine what's next for them. And so it's a place to imagine what does it mean to be an elder over time. And having been, elder is different than elderly. I know for some people are thinking, why would you ever call it elder? Like I'm 37 and I'm going to your Modern Elder Academy. I'm not an elder. Well, the person who came during our beta test, we had 153 people go through beta in January through June. The 37-year-old who came is surrounded by people in her work who are 23 and 24 years old. So being an elder is frankly just being usually a generation or a dozen years older than most of the people around you. And there's things you can offer as a result of that. So we look at the Modern Elder Academy and do the pyramid. And we say, what's the expectations? What's the desires? Where are the unrecognized needs? Thank you, guys.